Extra perspective now from El Paso District Attorney Bill Hicks joining us. Thanks for taking the time. I know obviously there's still the gag order in place on the state case, but one of the things we wanted to ask you about was something that was brought up in the federal sentencing earlier today from the judge, David Guadarrama, referencing the Supermax prison in Colorado. And obviously there's this transfer of custody to the state that is expected to happen. So lay out for us, is there a possibility that Patrick Crusius could be sent to Colorado before having to be brought back to El Paso?
No, the judge has to go through all of the normal procedures as if the state case did not exist. So the judge is proceeding with all of the standard paperwork that he does in every case like he normally would, which would include the sentencing recommendation, all of the normal procedures that he does in every case that he normally does. However, because the federal government took the Walmart shooter out of our custody on a writ of habeas corpus ad prosequendum, that means that whenever they are done with their judicial proceedings, not including when sending them off to prison, when they're done with their judicial proceedings, the Marshal's Service will turn him back over to the El Paso County detention officers, and he will be remitted back to state custody.
To the point that you can speak to, I'm going to play a hypothetical here. I know you're pursuing the death penalty, but say you don't get a death penalty sentence in the state case, and you have two of the same results, essentially, life in prison without the possibility of parole. You have one federal that would recommend Supermax in Colorado, and then you have the state. How is it determined at that point, if that's the result, where he goes?
Sure. So, as I've maintained all along, it is the jury that should be the one, and hopefully an El Paso jury should be the one who gets to determine if he receives the death penalty or if he receives life in prison. Whatever way the jury goes, if it's the death penalty, then he will be remitted to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division and will go to death row to serve on death row until the execution is served. If the jury says life in prison, then he'd be remitted to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for a service in life in prison in Texas prison system. We can come to an agreement between the federal government and us that instead of serving in Texas prison, he could go to federal prison. We could reach that agreement, but the initial sentence would be that he would go to a Texas prison.
Speaking of the death penalty, that was mentioned by the attorney Joe Spencer in the allocution earlier today, referencing political motivations. How do you address the political motivations, given that the death penalty was on the table right from the very beginning of this, long before you were district attorney?
I'm saddened that he thinks that was a politically motivated thing. The election for seeking the death penalty was filed initially by District Attorney Jaime Esparza. It was maintained under the Rosales administration, and whenever the defense team came to me and asked me to remove the death penalty election, as I've stated before, my office and myself went through a lot of evaluation of the death penalty. We spoke with civic leaders, religious leaders. We did a lot to evaluate what would be the appropriate thing for us to do. And in the end, I determined that I didn't think it was appropriate for me as the sole individual, for one person, to make that decision that he would receive life in prison, which is what would result if I withdrew the death penalty. And I think that it's appropriate that a jury of El Pasoans make that decision. So the state will continue to seek the death penalty, and it will ultimately be, as I think appropriate, an El Paso jury to make that decision on whether or not the Walmart shooter receives the death penalty or life in prison. That decision belongs to an El Paso jury.
All right, and that is a decision that a lot of people will be hanging in the balance for in the coming months, and potentially longer than that as they await the state jury trial, which could happen potentially 2024 or beyond. District Attorney Bill Hicks, thank you again for the extra perspective here on ABC 7 at 10.
Thank you.